In a quiet corner of South Africa, where the land stretches wide and the rivers run clean, a child was born under the open sky. His name was Ralilala, a name that meant pulling the branch of a tree, or simply, troublemaker. He did not know it then, but trouble would follow him, not because of his choices alone, but because of the world he was born into. He was part of the Themba people, a proud clan with traditions older than memory. His family belonged to the royal bloodline. His father was a respected advisor to local chiefs, a man who believed in justice and the right of every person to speak freely. The boy's home was the village of Mvizo, surrounded by hills and silence. There were no cars, no phones, and no noise from the outside world. Life was simple. Children played in the fields barefoot. They swam in the river and chased goats. Women worked together, and men gathered beneath trees to talk about land, cattle, and the future of their people. Stories were told by firelight, stories of heroes, warriors, kings, and the pain of a country that was no longer free. When Ralilala was still young, his father stood up to a white magistrate and lost everything. He was stripped of land, title, and income. Proud, he refused to bow. Soon after, he fell ill and died. The boy was 9 years old. He did not cry much. In his culture, tears were not shown in public. But something inside him shifted. He had lost the man who taught him dignity. After his father's death, he was adopted by Chief John Jintaba, a powerful Themba leader who took him into his royal household. Life changed overnight. He was no longer a village child. He now wore fine clothes, rode horses, and attended tribal councils. He watched decisions being made, listened to arguments over justice, and learned how leaders held power with wisdom or lost it through pride. This was his first education, and it happened not in a classroom but on woven mats under the sun. Later, he was sent to a Methodist school. There, on the first day, a teacher gave him a new name, Nelson. It was a tradition in many mission schools. African children were given English names. Nobody asked if they wanted one. And so, Ralilala became Nelson Mandela. The name stuck, but the boy remained the same, curious, polite, and careful with his words. Education became his path. He learned English, history, and politics. He read about the British Empire, about leaders in Europe, and about ancient philosophers. He began to notice that the heroes in his textbooks never looked like him. He lived in a country where white men ruled, and black men obeyed. He did not yet know the word for it, but he was beginning to understand injustice. When he reached the age of manhood, a traditional ceremony was held. He sat with other boys while elders spoke of duty, loyalty, and the changing world. One elder said something that stayed with him forever. "Our people are slaves in their own land." That sentence entered his heart like a quiet storm. It was the first time he heard someone speak the truth so clearly. He could not forget it. After that, he went to the University of Fort Hare, the most important school for black students in southern Africa. He was nervous at first. It was far from home, full of young men from different tribes and regions. But he found his place. He studied law and politics. He joined a student council. He made friends, shared dreams, and for the first time, saw how unity among Africans could lead to strength. But even at university, rules were tight. Freedom was limited. He took part in a student protest, not violent, just voices refusing silence. For that, he was expelled. His family was furious. Chief John Jintaba was ashamed. He sent Mandela away to work and reflect. Instead, Mandela ran. He did not want an arranged marriage. He did not want the quiet life of a tribal leader. He wanted something different, though he could not name it yet. He went to Johannesburg, a city of gold, danger, and noise. He was only 22. The buildings were tall, the streets filled with workers and rules. Everything was divided by skin color. He saw signs that read, "Whites only." He watched policemen demand papers. He learned that in the city, black men could not walk freely, could not live where they wished, and could not dream too loudly. He found work as a security guard, then as a law clerk. He wore old suits and took the train each day, careful not to break any laws. But inside, something was burning. He saw the injustice in every line, every street, every closed door. He began to read more deeply, about revolution, rights, freedom. He studied cases where laws were used to punish the innocent and protect the guilty. Each experience carved something in him, a sense of purpose, a hunger for change, a quiet rage. He was no longer just the boy from Viso or the student from Fort Hare. He was becoming something more, not yet a leader, but a listener, a learner, a seed planted in dry soil, waiting for the storm. And storms would come. Johannesburg was not a place of rest. It moved fast, spoke loud, and judged even louder. Nelson Mandela arrived there with no money, no degree, and no plan, only a desire to stay free and think for himself. His decision to run from the arranged marriage had made him an outcast to his guardian, but it gave him a life of his own. In the city, survival came before comfort. He worked in a mine office and later found a position as a clerk in a law firm run by white liberals. It was here he first felt the power of law, and the cruelty of how it was used. He watched black clients walk in with fear and walk out with nothing. Cases were often lost before they began. Laws were written not to protect, but to control. Passbooks became the symbol of this system. Every black person had to carry a small document at all times. Without it, they could be arrested. Officers would stop people randomly, demanding to see them. Men were dragged into trucks, beaten, fined, jailed. The law was everywhere, and it was never fair. Mandela studied law by night, working toward his degree. During the day, he read documents, listened to clients, and watched courtrooms. He was learning more from injustice than from textbooks. He knew the system would not change itself. It was built to last, designed to keep people like him quiet, poor, and powerless. But something inside him refused to accept that as permanent. He joined the African National Congress. At first, he observed more than spoke. He listened to elders who had been fighting for decades. But soon, he helped create the ANC Youth League, a group that wanted faster, braver action. The Youth League believed in mass resistance, national pride, and direct challenge to white rule. They believed that waiting for kindness would not bring freedom. The country needed to act. Mandela began organizing boycotts and petitions. He visited townships, spoke to workers, students, farmers. He urged them to believe they mattered. Every meeting was a risk. Police watched, reported, followed. But his voice gained attention. People began to listen, and the state began to notice. In 1952, the Defiance Campaign was launched. Thousands refused to obey racist laws. They entered white-only zones. They sat on forbidden benches. They ignored curfews. It was peaceful, but bold. Mandela became one of the leaders. For the first time, his name appeared in newspapers, both praised and condemned. He was arrested, tried, and banned from gatherings. But the campaign had worked. It had awakened a movement. That same year, Mandela and Oliver Tambo opened the first black-run law firm in the country. Their office was small, always full. They defended people who had no money and no chance. They fought eviction orders, passbook charges, false arrests. Sometimes they won, often they lost, but they never stopped. Clients came from every direction, traveling long hours just to be heard. Mandela worked long days, took no holidays, and earned little. But he believed in what he was doing. He still wore suits, spoke politely, and followed courtroom rules, even when the system mocked his effort. To him, law was both a weapon and a wall, used by the powerful, but also something that could be rewritten. The government responded with harsher laws. The Suppression of Communism Act allowed the state to ban people without trial. Mandela was placed under restrictions. He could not leave Johannesburg. He could not meet with more than one person at a time. His speeches were banned from publication. But his influence spread anyway. He had become a symbol of a rising force. In 1955, opposition leaders gathered in secret to create the Freedom Charter, a vision of a new South Africa. It called for equal rights, shared land, fair labor, and one person, one vote. Mandela helped organize it, though he could not attend the main event due to his ban. The charter was declared treason by the state. Soon after, Mandela and 155 others were arrested and charged. The trial lasted 4 years. Every week, he stood in court defending his ideals. Eventually, all were acquitted, but the message was clear: the government would crush opposition by any means necessary. During these years, Mandela's personal life grew complicated. He married Winnie, a strong, intelligent woman who shared his values. They had 2 daughters. But his activism kept him away, and the state's pressure never lifted. His family was watched. His phones were tapped. His movements were recorded. Still, he pressed on. He began to believe that peaceful protest alone would not be enough. The violence by the state was increasing. Police used guns against unarmed crowds. People were dying in protests. The idea of armed resistance entered his mind, not as a first choice, but as a last resort. South Africa was changing, and so was he. One of the most painful moments came in 1960. The Sharpeville Massacre. 69 people were killed while protesting past laws. Most were shot in the back. The images shocked the world. Protests spread, but so did arrests. The government declared a state of emergency. The ANC was banned. Mandela went underground. His legal methods were no longer safe. He began to live in disguise, move at night, and use false names. Everything he had learned, about law, resistance, courage, now guided him toward a new phase. He was no longer just a lawyer or activist. He was becoming a target, and he knew the road ahead could lead only to prison, exile, or death. But he did not pause. He had chosen his path, and he would follow it without regret. Nelson Mandela knew the cost of his next move. After Sharpeville, peaceful protests had been met with bullets. Words were silenced. Marches were broken with force. The state had shown that it would not listen. So Mandela made a decision that changed the direction of his life and the struggle. He co-founded a new wing of the African National Congress. Its name was Umkhonto we Sizwe, meaning Spear of the Nation. It would no longer be nonviolent. It would carry out sabotage against government targets. No civilians, no random destruction, only symbols of apartheid. It was not revenge. It was pressure. Mandela went underground. He became known as the Black Pimpernel, slipping through cities in disguise. He used false names, stayed in safe houses, wore workers' clothes. He traveled across Africa and Europe to raise support and training for the movement. Countries like Ethiopia, Algeria, and Ghana welcomed him. He studied guerrilla tactics, built networks, met other revolutionaries. He spoke at conferences about the South African struggle, asking the world to see apartheid for what it was, a brutal, legal form of racism. While abroad, he learned of his growing image at home. To many South Africans, he had become a figure of resistance, even though his face was rarely seen. But the risk of return was always high. In 1962, he came back, determined to continue. Within months, he was arrested. The charge was leaving the country without permission and inciting workers to strike. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While serving that sentence, police raided a farm in Rivonia near Johannesburg. There, they found documents, plans, and evidence linking Mandela and other ANC leaders to acts of sabotage. A new trial began, the Rivonia trial. This time, the state was aiming for the death penalty. In court, Mandela wore traditional African dress on the first day. It was a statement: he was an African, not a subject of colonial rule. The trial lasted months. The prosecution called him a terrorist. He called himself a freedom fighter. He did not deny the sabotage. He explained it. Apartheid was violence. Responding to violence with silence would mean surrender. Then came his final speech from the dock. It became one of the most powerful in modern history. He said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. He did not beg for mercy. He stood for justice. The court did not hang him. Instead, Mandela and 7 others were sentenced to life imprisonment. He was sent to Robben Island, a maximum security prison off the coast. He was 34 when he entered. He would spend the next 18 years there. Prison life was designed to break him. The cell was small. The bed was a mat on the floor. He was forced to break stones in the yard. Visits were rare and censored. Letters came only twice a year. The goal was to erase his influence and isolate him from the movement. But he did not vanish. Inside the prison, he organized. He taught other prisoners about law, history, and leadership. He studied Afrikaans to understand the mindset of his jailers. He exercised daily, kept strict routines, and never allowed bitterness to overtake discipline. He also negotiated. Quietly, over years, he had secret conversations with government officials. He insisted that real peace required ending apartheid, not cutting a deal for his own release. The world outside had not forgotten him. His name was on posters, banners, and stages across continents. The call to "Free Nelson Mandela" became global. While Mandela was locked away, South Africa was burning. Uprisings, protests, international sanctions, and boycotts shook the regime. The economy weakened. Pressure mounted. Mandela became the symbol of the fight, a man who had given his freedom for the dignity of millions. By the 1980s, talks of his release grew louder. The government offered to free him if he renounced violence. He refused. He would not trade principle for freedom. Only unconditional release and full political rights for all South Africans would be acceptable. His leadership matured even behind bars. He was no longer only a revolutionary. He was now a negotiator, a strategist, a father figure to a movement that needed direction more than anger. He understood the weight of what lay ahead. Transition was coming, but it had to be built carefully, or it would collapse. After 27 years, the government had no choice. The resistance was too strong, the isolation too costly. In 1990, then-President F.W. de Klerk announced Mandela's release. The moment had arrived, not with guns or fire, but with dignity. Mandela walked out, tall and calm, holding the hand of his wife Winnie. He raised his fist, not in triumph, but in unity. He returned not as a broken man, but as a leader ready to build a future. He immediately called for peace, not revenge. He asked black South Africans to forgive, but not forget. He urged white South Africans to stay and help build a shared nation. His vision had always been greater than power. It was about fairness. Mandela's release was not the end of struggle, but the beginning of transformation. Talks began between the government and the ANC. It would take years to write a new constitution, hold elections, and form a new South Africa. But the hardest part was already behind, the decades of sacrifice that proved freedom could not be denied forever. Nelson Mandela entered prison with resolve, but nothing could fully prepare him for what lay ahead. Robben Island was isolated, harsh, and designed for control. He was assigned a number, 46664, and stripped of all personal identity. His cell was bare, a bucket, a mat, and cold stone walls. The guards addressed him by his number, never by his name. Every part of the prison experience was meant to dehumanize. The work was physical. Prisoners broke rocks in a lime quarry under a hot sun that damaged their eyes permanently. Meals were unequal. Black prisoners received smaller portions than others. There were no books at first, no newspapers, and speaking across cells was forbidden. Letters were heavily censored and often delayed for months. Visits from family were limited to one every 6 months, no longer than 30 minutes, and always monitored. Despite these conditions, Mandela found structure. He treated prison as an extension of the struggle. Discipline became his method of resistance. He rose early, exercised, studied, and maintained routines. He encouraged other prisoners to educate themselves. He treated even his enemies with respect, which often confused and softened the guards. Slowly, he gained quiet influence. He believed that how one behaved in hardship was more powerful than how one acted in comfort. The political prisoners formed a secret university inside the prison. Lessons were held during work breaks or at night in hushed tones. They called it the University of Robben Island. Mandela taught law and history, but more than facts, he taught values, strategy, patience, self-control. He was not interested in building anger. He was focused on building leaders who could shape the future. Outside the prison walls, the country was in turmoil. In the townships, protests intensified. Youth movements clashed with police. The government responded with mass arrests, bans, and violent suppression. But resistance only grew. The image of Mandela, though unseen, became central to the cause. His face appeared on posters, in songs, and in speeches across the world. He was a prisoner, but he was also becoming a symbol. The government tried to weaken that image. It moved Mandela and a few others to Pollsmoor prison in the 1980s. Conditions there were slightly better, but isolation remained. Then came Victor Verster prison, where he was allowed a small house within the compound. It was part of a new strategy. The government wanted to test his views, hoping to use him to manage the rising unrest. Mandela was careful. He accepted discussions, but not compromise. Secret talks began between Mandela and state officials. These conversations were long and tense. He made it clear that no peace was possible without the unbanning of the ANC, release of political prisoners, and full political rights for all. He refused to be used as a tool to calm the masses. Everything he did was measured. Every word was chosen for the long game, not the short win. As years passed, the outside pressure grew. Countries imposed sanctions. Cultural and sports boycotts isolated South Africa. Global companies withdrew investments. Churches, unions, and students abroad demanded an end to apartheid. Artists performed in his name. World leaders spoke of him not as a criminal, but as a man of principle. His imprisonment had become the regime's greatest weakness. Mandela's family suffered during these decades. His wife Winnie faced harassment, arrest, and house raids. She became a powerful figure in her own right but was also surrounded by controversy. Mandela's daughters grew up without him. He missed birthdays, milestones, losses, each absence a wound that could not be repaired. He carried that pain quietly, never using it for pity or anger, only as a reason to continue. Inside prison, Mandela aged. His hair grayed. His body weakened. Yet his mind remained sharp. He read constantly, politics, philosophy, biographies. He admired leaders who built nations through dialogue, not fear. He believed that even his oppressors could change. Forgiveness, he once said, was not weakness. It was the weapon of the strong. In 1989, South Africa's political climate shifted. The old president stepped down. F.W. de Klerk took office, and the direction began to change. De Klerk unbanned liberation movements, released political prisoners, and began unfreezing negotiations. Mandela watched cautiously. Promises were not enough, he wanted results. But momentum was undeniable. On February 2, 1990, the government announced that Mandela would be released. 9 days later, after 27 years, he walked free. He had spent over half his adult life behind bars, yet emerged without hatred. He called for calm. He asked for discipline, not revenge. The world expected a man hardened by loss, but he offered peace. His first public speech recentered the movement. He reminded people that freedom was not yet achieved. Real liberation meant political power, dignity, and equal opportunity. He urged supporters to stay united. He warned against division, corruption, and violence. His tone was measured, revolutionary, but responsible. Mandela was no longer just a prisoner or activist. He had become a global statesman. His reputation extended beyond politics into morality. People saw him as a model for leadership rooted in sacrifice and vision. Every gesture, every sentence carried weight. He did not take it lightly. He knew the next phase, negotiation, would be harder than the fight. His years in prison had not only changed him, they had prepared him. He had learned how to listen, how to persuade, how to stand firm without becoming rigid. He knew that any settlement must include truth, justice, and reconciliation. Anything less would plant seeds for future conflict. The end of his imprisonment marked a shift not just in one life, but in the life of a nation. Mandela's years in the dark had forged something unbreakable. Not just a man prepared to lead, but a movement ready to govern. He had entered prison as a young activist. He left as the hope of an entire country. Nelson Mandela stepped into a divided nation. Years of violence, fear, and oppression had built deep mistrust between its people. The challenge was no longer just freedom, it was unity. Mandela knew that removing apartheid laws was only the beginning. Healing wounds, restoring dignity, and building a shared future required something greater than protest. It required leadership rooted in forgiveness, vision, and truth. He returned to the African National Congress not as a protester, but as a leader expected to guide a peaceful transition. Formal talks began between the ANC and the government. These negotiations were slow and tense. Every issue sparked disagreement: political structure, voting rights, land ownership, security, language. Opposing sides held decades of resentment. Violence threatened to collapse progress at every step. Mandela believed in negotiation, even with former enemies. He maintained contact with all parties, from radical youth movements to conservative Afrikaner leaders. His calm, measured approach stood in contrast to the emotional chaos around him. When others demanded revenge, he insisted on reason. When extremists tried to derail talks with bloodshed, he called for restraint. His credibility came not from his position, but from his sacrifice. In 1993, a historic agreement was reached. A democratic election would be held the following year. Every adult citizen, regardless of race, would vote. It would be the first time Black South Africans would cast ballots in their own country. For many, it felt impossible. But it was real. The date was set, April 27, 1994. The campaign began. Mandela, now the ANC's presidential candidate, traveled across the nation. He visited cities, villages, factories, schools. He listened more than he spoke. His message remained consistent: peace, equality, shared responsibility. He promised housing, education, and jobs, but warned that rebuilding would take time. He did not offer perfection, only honesty. Election day arrived with long lines at polling stations. Some people waited for hours, barefoot, elderly, determined. Many wept as they voted, not from sadness, but from the weight of history. The results were clear. The ANC won with a strong majority. Nelson Mandela had been elected the first black president of South Africa. His inauguration marked a turning point, not just politically, but morally. A country built on exclusion was now being led by someone once excluded. As president, Mandela faced enormous challenges. The economy was fragile. Inequality remained severe. Millions lacked access to clean water, electricity, healthcare. Social trust was almost non-existent. Whites feared revenge. Blacks demanded rapid change. The risk of civil war still hovered. Mandela's first major act was to establish the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Its purpose was not to punish, but to reveal. Victims of apartheid violence could tell their stories. Perpetrators could confess their crimes in exchange for amnesty. The process was painful, emotional, and controversial, but it helped the country confront its past without destroying itself. He also focused on symbolic unity. When the mostly white national rugby team prepared to host the 1995 World Cup, Mandela chose to support them publicly. Many in the black community opposed this. To them, the team represented oppression. But Mandela saw an opportunity. He wore the team's jersey, attended matches, and stood alongside players. South Africa won the final. The stadium erupted, not just for sport, but for shared identity. That single gesture carried a message more powerful than any speech. Throughout his presidency, Mandela refused special privileges. He declined a second term. He lived modestly, paid attention to detail, and asked hard questions. He demanded that his ministers serve the people, not themselves. Corruption angered him. Arrogance disgusted him. He reminded everyone that power was temporary and responsibility permanent. By 1999, he stepped down, handing leadership to a new generation. His decision to retire was rare in African politics. Many leaders clung to office. Mandela walked away with grace. He believed the struggle had never been about him. It was about the people. In retirement, he turned to global causes: HIV/AIDS awareness, peace negotiations, education. He created the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focusing on justice, leadership, and memory. His presence remained powerful, even as his health declined. He met world leaders, children, prisoners, and ordinary citizens. Each encounter carried the same message: dignity is a right, not a gift. Mandela received awards from every corner of the globe. The Nobel Peace Prize, honorary degrees, streets, and buildings named in his honor. Yet he never let praise distort his purpose. He saw himself not as a saint, but as a man who tried, failed, learned, and tried again. He often said, "I am not a prophet. I am a servant of the people." As old age set in, he became quieter. He withdrew from public life, allowing the world to continue its journey without his daily voice. In 2013, he passed away at the age of 95. The world mourned, but more importantly remembered. Not just a leader, but a symbol of possibility. Mandela's life did not offer easy answers. It offered proof that character can overcome cruelty, that patience can defeat fear, that forgiveness can rewrite history. He showed that leadership means listening before speaking, acting without ego, and stepping aside when the time is right. Today, his legacy lives in more than books or statues. It lives in courts that serve all people, in schools open to every child, in the right to vote, and the right to hope. He reminded the world that the path to justice is long, but never closed. He walked it with steady feet and left footprints for others to follow. It always seems impossible until it's done. And he did it.